Freezing in the Wild West, the Apache woman desperately begs the cowboy for shelter. The winter came earlier than anyone expected that year. The land that usually stayed dry and hard had turned white and silent. Snow covered the wide plains, stretching as far as the eye could see. The wind moved like an unseen force, sharp and unforgiving. It howled across the open land, carrying ice and fear with it. Even strong men avoided travel during storms like this. Yet out there in the freezing wilderness, a woman walked alone. She was Apache, wrapped in worn clothing that once kept her warm but now felt thin against the cold. Her footsteps were slow and uneven. Every breath burned her chest. Snow clung to her hair and eyelashes, making it hard to see. Her hands trembled, stiff and numb. She had been walking for hours, maybe longer. Time had lost its meaning. All she knew was that if she stopped moving, she would not survive. Earlier that day, she had not been alone. She had been traveling with others, moving carefully across the land to avoid danger. But the storm arrived without warning. The sky darkened quickly and the wind rose like an angry spirit. Horses panicked. People shouted. In the confusion, she was separated. The snow erased tracks within minutes, leaving no sign of where her people had gone. She had called out until her voice faded, swallowed by the wind. Now silence followed her. A heavy, crushing silence broken only by the storm. Her legs felt weak. Each step took effort. The cold reached deep into her bones. She pressed her arms close to her body, trying to hold what little warmth remained. Hunger twisted inside her, but fear was worse. Fear of the cold, fear of the night that was coming fast. The sun had already begun to sink, hiding behind thick clouds. Darkness would make everything worse. She knew this land well, but snow changed it. Familiar paths disappeared. Rocks and dips hid under white layers, waiting to trip the tired and weak. Once she stumbled and fell into the snow. For a moment she stayed there, too exhausted to rise. The cold crept into her clothes, stealing warmth quickly. She forced herself up, whispering a quiet prayer. Her people believed the land listened, even in anger. She asked for strength. She asked for shelter. She did not want to die alone on the open plain. As she struggled forward, something caught her eye through the blowing snow, a faint glow. At first, she thought it was a trick of her tired mind. She blinked and looked again. The light remained, weak but real. Hope stirred inside her chest, painful and sudden. She focused all her strength on moving toward it. With each step, the light grew clearer. It came from a small ranch house standing alone against the storm. Smoke rose from a chimney, quickly torn apart by the wind. To the woman, it looked like a promise: shelter, warmth, life. She did not know who lived there. She knew the risk. The land had seen too much fear between people. Many would not help someone like her. Some would turn her away, others might do worse, but she had no choice. The storm showed no mercy. If she did not reach that house, she would not last the night. Inside the ranch house, a man moved slowly across the wooden floor. He was a cowboy, living far from towns and people. He had chosen this lonely place on purpose. The storm rattled the walls and windows, reminding him why he rarely trusted the land. He added more wood to the fire, watching the flames rise. The warmth felt good against the cold that leaked through every crack. He had spent the day preparing for the storm. The animals were secured, food was stored. He believed no one else would be foolish enough to travel in weather like this. He was wrong. A strange sound reached his ears, barely noticeable under the wind. He paused, listening. At first he thought it was the storm itself. Then he heard it again, a soft noise like someone trying to speak but failing. His hand tightened at his side. Few people ever came this far out. Fewer still during a storm. Outside, the woman reached the ranch gate. Her strength finally failed her. She leaned against the rough wood, gasping for air. The light from the window was close now, but her body felt heavy, as if the snow itself pulled her down. She raised one hand and knocked weakly against the gate. The sound was small, almost lost in the wind. She waited, her head spinning. Memories of her people flashed through her mind. Warm fires, laughter, safety. She wondered if she would see them again. Her legs gave out and she sank to the ground, curling in on herself to protect what warmth remained. Inside, the cowboy stood still, listening harder now. His heart beat faster. He told himself it was nothing, yet something urged him toward the door. He grabbed his coat and stepped closer. The fire crackled behind him as he reached for the handle. When he opened the door, the storm rushed in, filling the room with cold air. Snow swirled at his feet. At first, he saw nothing but white and darkness. Then he noticed a shape near the gate, a person, lying still. For a moment, he hesitated. He understood the dangers of this land. He understood fear. But he also saw a human being in trouble. The storm did not care who she was. Neither, he realized, should he. He stepped out into the snow, each step careful. The wind pushed against him, biting at his face. When he reached her, he knelt down and saw her clearly. She was alive, but barely. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow. Snow covered her hair and shoulders. He did not speak at first. Words felt useless against the storm. Gently he lifted her, surprised by how light she felt. Hunger and cold had taken their toll. He carried her toward the house, fighting the wind with every step. As he crossed the threshold, the warmth from the fire met them. He closed the door behind him, shutting out the storm. The woman stirred slightly, letting out a weak sound. Her eyes opened for a moment, dark and filled with fear. She tried to speak, but no words came. The cowboy laid her near the fire, careful not to bring her too close. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. He moved slowly, unsure but determined. The storm raged outside, but inside the small ranch house, two lives had crossed paths. Neither of them knew what the coming days would bring. For now, there was only the sound of the fire, the storm beyond the walls, and the fragile hope that warmth might be enough to keep death away for one more night. The fire burned low and steady, filling the small cabin with a soft orange light. Outside, the storm did not slow. Wind struck the walls again and again, like it was testing the strength of the place. Snow tapped against the window, building up in heavy layers. Inside, the cowboy stood near the door for a long moment, listening. He wanted to be sure no one else was out there. The storm answered him with another hard gust. He turned his attention back to the woman lying near the fire. She was wrapped in a thick blanket now, but her body still shook. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. He had seen men hurt on the trail before, frozen and tired, but this was different. She looked fragile, like the cold had already taken too much from her. He crouched down slowly, careful not to frighten her if she woke. He added more wood to the fire, then moved it a little farther away so the heat would come gently. He remembered stories of people harmed by sudden warmth after freezing. He did not know much, but he knew enough to be careful. The woman's eyes opened again. This time they stayed open longer. She stared at him, fear filling her face. Her body tensed and she tried to pull away, but she was too weak. Her lips moved, but the words were not clear. The sound that came out was more like a breath than speech. "It's all right," the cowboy said softly, though he was not sure she understood his words. He raised his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "You're safe. You're inside now." She watched him closely, her eyes following every movement. She did not relax, but she stopped trying to move. The fear stayed, deep and sharp, shaped by many memories. She did not know him. She did not know this place. All she knew was that she had begged the storm for life, and now she was here. The cowboy stood and walked to a small shelf near the wall. He filled a cup with water and brought it back. He knelt again and held it near her lips. "Small sips," he said gently. He tilted the cup just enough. At first she shook her head, unsure. Then thirst took over. She drank slowly, each swallow careful, like she feared it might disappear. When she finished, he pulled the cup away and set it aside. He gave her time, letting the silence settle. The fire cracked and popped. Outside, the storm howled like it was angry about losing its prize. He noticed her hands. They were red and swollen, the skin rough and cracked from cold. He frowned slightly, then reached for another blanket and wrapped it around her hands, rubbing them gently through the cloth to bring warmth. She flinched at his touch but did not pull away. The cowboy felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. He knew what others might say if they found her here. He knew the stories people told, full of fear and blame, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the woman in front of him, alive but hanging by a thread. She spoke again, her voice still weak. The words were not in his language. He did not understand them, but the tone was clear. It was a mix of pain, fear, and something else, hope maybe. He listened anyway, nodding slowly to show he heard her. "I don't understand," he said honestly, "but you can stay. The storm won't let you leave tonight." Her eyes flicked toward the window when he said storm, as if she could feel it even through the walls. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. She nodded once slowly. It was a small movement, but it carried meaning. She would stay. She had no strength left to argue. The cowboy moved around the cabin, preparing what he could. He set a pot of water near the fire to warm. He found some bread and placed it nearby, tearing off small pieces. He did not offer it yet. He remembered that a body too weak could not handle too much at once. As he worked, he stayed aware of her. He did not turn his back for long. Trust did not come easily on either side. He kept his movements calm and clear, letting her see everything he did. The hours passed slowly. The storm showed no sign of easing. The wind screamed through the night, rattling the roof. Snow piled higher against the walls. The cowboy realized that even if she wanted to leave, it would be impossible. The land outside had become a trap. He sat down in a chair across from her, resting his elbows on his knees. He watched the fire and listened to her breathing. It grew steadier as the warmth worked its way back into her body. Color slowly returned to her face. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket tighter. Her eyes stayed open now, watching him, the firelight reflecting in them. She seemed more alert, though still tired. She pointed weakly toward herself and spoke a single word in her language. He shook his head gently. "I don't know your name," he said. Then he pointed to himself. "I'm just a rancher, a cowboy." She did not understand the words, but she understood the gesture. After a moment, she repeated the pointing, this time toward him. Her voice shaped a sound that was not his name, but it felt like a question. He smiled faintly. "That'll do," he said, nodding. The smile surprised him. He realized how long it had been since he last smiled at anyone. He stood and poured a little warm water into another cup. This time, he added a small piece of bread, letting it soften. He brought it to her and waited. She looked at it carefully, then at him. He nodded again, slow and steady. She took the cup with trembling hands and drank. When she finished, she ate the bread in small bites. With each one, some strength seemed to return to her. The night stretched on. Sleep came in short moments. The woman drifted in and out, her body finally giving in to rest. The cowboy stayed awake, keeping the fire alive, listening for any change in the storm. He thought about the past, about the choices that led him to this lonely place. He had wanted quiet. He had wanted distance from people and their troubles. Now trouble had found his door anyway. At one point the woman stirred suddenly, her breathing quick and sharp. Her eyes opened wide, filled with fear. She spoke rapidly, her voice rising. The cowboy stood quickly, raising his hands again. "It's all right," he said, though the words felt small. He moved closer to the firelight so she could see his face. He stayed where he was, not touching her this time. Slowly, her breathing eased. She looked around, recognizing the cabin, the fire, the blankets. The fear faded, replaced by exhaustion. She lay back down, her eyes still open but calm. The cowboy returned to his chair, his heart beating fast. He realized how close she still was to the edge, how easily fear could pull her back into panic. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. When morning came, it brought no light, only a gray glow behind thick clouds. Snow blocked the door almost halfway up. The cowboy pushed it open just enough to look outside, then closed it again. There was no leaving today. He turned back to the woman and met her eyes. He pointed to the door, then shook his head. He pointed to the fire and the cabin, then nodded. She followed his meaning. A quiet understanding passed between them. They were both trapped by the storm, and for now they would survive it together. Morning passed slowly, though it was hard to tell where night ended and day began. The clouds stayed thick and low, pressing down on the land. Inside the cabin, the fire gave steady warmth, and the air smelled of wood and smoke. The storm still ruled the world outside, but inside, time moved differently. The woman woke more fully as the hours passed. Her movements were careful, like someone learning their body again. She sat up slightly, supported by the blankets, and looked around the room. Her eyes took in every detail: the rough wooden walls, the hanging tools, the small table, the shelves with jars and cloth. Nothing escaped her notice. This place was strange, but it was safe for now. The cowboy noticed her watching. He was sitting near the fire, cleaning a small pot with a cloth. When their eyes met, he gave a short nod. She did not smile, but the fear he had seen before was softer now. It had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. He stood and moved slowly, careful not to surprise her. He warmed water again and prepared a simple meal, small and plain. He placed it within her reach and stepped back. He had learned that distance helped. Trust, he knew, did not grow fast. She ate quietly, pausing often to rest. When she finished, she placed the bowl aside and rested her hands on her knees. She spoke a few words in her language, her voice stronger than before. He listened, though he did not understand. Her tone was calmer now, less urgent. He pointed gently toward her hands, then toward the fire, making a rubbing motion. She nodded, understanding his meaning. He wrapped her hands again and showed her how to hold them near the warmth, not too close. She followed his lead. The hours stretched on. They shared the space in silence, but it was no longer heavy. It felt careful, thoughtful. Sometimes she watched the fire. Sometimes he watched the storm through the small window. When the wind hit hard, both of them tensed, listening together. Later, she rose to her feet for the first time. The movement was slow and unsteady. He stood at once, ready to help, but she lifted one hand, signaling that she wanted to try alone. He respected that. She took a few steps, holding onto the table. Her legs shook, but they held. She looked at him then, something firm in her eyes. She spoke a word and pressed her hand briefly to her chest. He understood the meaning, even if not the words. He nodded once in reply. As the day continued, they found ways to speak without language. He pointed to objects and showed their use. She watched closely, learning. When she pointed to something he did not expect, he paused, then explained with gestures and patience. It was slow, but it worked. At one point, she moved closer to the window and brushed snow from the glass. She looked out at the white land and spoke softly. Her shoulders lowered and a sadness passed over her face. He did not interrupt. He knew that look. He had worn it himself many times. When she finished speaking, she sat down again, pulling the blanket close. He brought her another cup of warm water and sat across from her. The fire filled the space between them. He thought about his past more than he had in years. He had come to this place to be alone, to avoid memories that followed him everywhere else. He had lost people he loved to sickness and hard times. The land had been kinder than people, or so he had believed. Yet here he was, sharing his shelter with a stranger, and the silence felt less empty than before. As evening came, the storm still showed no sign of breaking. Snow continued to fall, heavy and steady. He prepared another simple meal, and this time he sat closer while she ate. She did not pull away. She seemed tired but stronger. Later, as the fire burned low, she began to speak again. This time, her hands moved as much as her words. She pointed toward the distance, made a wide motion, then brought her hands together, shaking her head. Her eyes darkened with memory. He realized she was telling him about being separated from her people. He listened closely, nodding when it seemed right. When she finished, she looked at him, searching his face. He placed his hand flat against the floor, steady and calm, then pointed to the door and shook his head. He pointed back to the fire and the cabin and nodded. She seemed to understand. The storm had taken away her path, but not her life. Night came again, quiet inside but loud beyond the walls. The woman lay down near the fire, resting more easily now. The cowboy sat in his chair, letting his eyes close for short moments. He did not sleep deeply. He stayed aware, listening to her breathing, the fire, the wind. At some point, she spoke his attention again. He opened his eyes. She was sitting up, holding something small in her hand. It was a simple object, worn smooth by time. She held it out to him, her face serious. He hesitated, then accepted it gently. He did not know its meaning, but he felt its weight. He looked at her, then back at the object. Slowly, he returned it to her palm and closed her fingers around it. He shook his head softly and placed his hand over his heart. He did not need a gift. Her being alive was enough. She watched him for a long moment. Then she nodded as if a quiet agreement had been made. The storm began to change during the night. The wind softened and the snow fell lighter. By morning, a pale light filtered through the clouds. The world outside was still frozen and white, but the worst had passed. He opened the door carefully and looked out. The land was silent, resting after the storm's anger. He turned back to her and smiled faintly. She rose and came to stand beside him, looking out at the open plain. They stood there together, not touching but close enough to share the moment. Both knew that choices waited beyond the door. For now, they had survived the storm. What came next would test them in different ways. The morning light was weak but steady, spreading slowly across the frozen land. The storm had passed, leaving behind deep snow and a silence that felt heavy and calm at the same time. The world looked new, untouched, but also dangerous in its quiet beauty. Inside the cabin, the warmth still held, though the fire had burned low during the night. The cowboy stepped outside first, his boots sinking into the snow. He moved carefully, testing the ground, watching for ice hidden beneath the white surface. The air was sharp and cold, but it no longer cut like before. He breathed deeply, then looked back toward the cabin. The woman stood in the doorway, wrapped in blankets, watching him. Her face was stronger now. The weakness that once weighed her down had eased, replaced by focus and awareness. She stepped outside slowly, feeling the cold again but ready for it this time. They stood together in the open, looking across the land. Snow-covered hills rolled into the distance. The storm had erased many paths, but the sky above was clearer. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the cold air fill her lungs. This land was familiar to her, even changed by snow. She pointed toward the far distance, then to herself, then made a walking motion with her fingers. Her meaning was clear. She needed to go. Her people would be searching or waiting or already moving. She could not stay forever. The cowboy nodded slowly. He had expected this moment. Still, it carried weight. The cabin felt different now, less empty than before. He turned and walked back inside, gesturing for her to follow. Inside, he gathered supplies. He moved with care, choosing what he could spare. A small sack of food, a bottle of water, a thick coat. He laid them out on the table so she could see. He pointed to each item and then to her. She understood. Her eyes softened and she bowed her head slightly in thanks. He hesitated, then walked to the corner of the cabin where a saddle rested. He brushed snow from it and checked the straps. Outside, a horse waited in the small shelter near the cabin. The animal had survived the storm well, strong and calm. The cowboy looked at the horse for a long moment. This was not an easy choice. Out here, a horse meant safety and survival. He led the horse closer to the cabin. The woman's eyes widened slightly. She shook her head once, slowly, as if saying it was too much. He raised his hand gently and shook his head back. He placed his hand on the horse's neck, then pointed to her, then to the open land. He wanted her to live. She stepped closer to the horse, resting her hand on its warm side. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she reached into her clothing and took out the small object she had shown him the night before. This time, she did not offer it. She pressed it to her chest, then pointed to him, then back to herself. Her voice was quiet but steady. Though he did not know the words, he understood. This moment would stay with both of them. He helped her prepare for the journey. He showed her the best direction to avoid deep snow and rough ground. He pointed out landmarks she might recognize once the snow thinned. She listened closely, memorizing every detail. As they stood outside, a distant sound reached them, faint but real. The cowboy stiffened slightly. He knew that sound. Movement. Voices far away, carried by the cold air. Others were traveling through the land now that the storm had passed. The woman noticed his reaction. She followed his gaze and listened. Her body tensed. She understood the danger too. The land beyond the cabin was not empty. Not everyone would offer shelter as he had. The cowboy stepped closer to her and spoke firmly but calmly. He pointed toward a narrow path along a ridge, less visible from the open plain. He tapped his chest, then made a stopping motion. She nodded. She would leave now while the moment allowed. They did not rush, but they did not linger. He helped her onto the horse, adjusting the saddle carefully. When she was settled, she looked down at him. Their eyes met. There was no fear there now, only understanding and something quieter, deeper. She placed her hand over her heart, then extended it toward him. This time he accepted. Their hands touched briefly, firm and steady. No words were needed. She turned the horse toward the path he had shown her. Snow crunched softly beneath its steps. After a few paces, she stopped and looked back once more. He stood near the cabin, his coat pulled tight against the cold, watching until she was out of sight. The cowboy remained there long after she was gone. The silence returned, but it was not the same as before. It carried memory now, meaning. He went back inside the cabin and closed the door. The space felt larger and emptier at once. He sat by the fire, letting the warmth reach him, and stared into the flames. He thought about the world beyond his land, about the choices people made when fear ruled them. He wondered if kindness would ever be remembered in times like these. Far away, the woman rode carefully through the snow. The horse moved steadily, guided by her calm hands. The supplies he had given her would make the journey possible. She followed the path along the ridge just as he had shown her. As the hours passed, the land slowly changed. The snow thinned in places. Familiar shapes began to appear. She felt relief grow inside her, cautious but real. She had survived the storm. She had survived the night. And she would survive the journey home. She did not know what the future held. She did not know if she would ever see the cowboy again. But she carried the memory of his fire, his shelter, and his choice. In a world shaped by hardship, that mattered. When the sun began to lower in the sky, she paused on a hill and looked back once more, though the cabin was far beyond sight. She whispered a few quiet words to the land, then turned forward and continued on. Back at the ranch, the cowboy stepped outside as the day ended. The sky glowed with soft colors reflected off the snow. He stood there, hands at his sides, breathing in the cold air. He did not regret his choice, not even a little. The storm had passed, but its lesson remained. Sometimes survival was not just about strength. Sometimes it was about opening a door when fear told you not to. The land slowly changed as the days passed. Snow melted in some places and stayed thick in others. The woman traveled carefully, resting when needed, moving when the light was right. The horse stayed strong, and the supplies lasted longer than she had hoped. Each night when she made a small fire and wrapped herself against the cold, she remembered the cabin, the steady warmth, and the quiet man who had opened his door without knowing her name. After many days, she reached familiar ground. The shapes of the hills and trees spoke to her like old friends. Smoke rose in the distance, thin and steady. Her heart beat faster. She guided the horse forward, her eyes sharp and searching. When voices finally reached her ears, she stopped and listened. They were voices she knew. People came running when they saw her. There were looks of surprise, relief, and disbelief. Questions came quickly, but she raised her hand, asking for time. She dismounted slowly, her legs stiff but strong enough to hold her. Someone wrapped her in warmer clothing. Another offered water. She drank and breathed deeply, feeling safety settle around her at last. Later, when the excitement calmed, she told her story. She spoke of the storm, the separation, the long walk through snow and fear. She spoke of the ranch house standing alone against the wind. And she spoke of the cowboy who took her in, who gave warmth, food, and a chance to live. Some listened in silence. Some shook their heads, surprised. Others looked thoughtful. Stories about fear and danger were common, but stories of kindness were rarer. Yet this one was real. She carried proof of it in her steady voice and living presence. Life slowly returned to its rhythm. The woman healed fully as days turned into weeks. She helped where she could, shared meals, and laughed again. But sometimes, when the fire burned low at night, she touched the small object she carried and thought of the cabin far away. She wondered how the cowboy was, if the land had been kind to him after she left. Far from her home, the cowboy returned to his quiet life. The ranch stood as it always had, alone under the wide sky. He repaired what the storm had damaged and tended to his animals. The days were simple, but they felt different now. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt full of memory. At times, he found himself looking toward the path she had taken, though he knew she would not be there. He did not expect her return. He did not hope for it. He only remembered the way she watched carefully, the way she listened, the strength she showed without needing words. Neighbors eventually came by, drawn by news carried slowly across the land. Someone had spoken of an Apache woman who survived a deadly storm. Someone else mentioned a rancher who helped her. When asked, the cowboy said little. He did not seek praise. He only said that anyone in need deserved shelter from the cold. Winter passed into spring. The land softened and color returned to the plains. The cowboy worked his fields and mended fences. Life moved forward, steady and honest. Yet he knew that something in him had shifted. He no longer saw the world as divided as before. He had seen what happened when fear was set aside, even for a moment. Years later, travelers passing through the region would hear a quiet story. Some said it happened during the harshest winter anyone could remember. Others said it was proof that even in hard times, people could choose kindness. The details changed with each telling, but the heart of the story stayed the same. Some evenings, the woman would tell the story to younger ones sitting near the fire. She never used the cowboy's name. She called him simply the man who opened his door. She taught them that survival was not only about strength or skill, but about courage in unexpected forms. The cowboy, now older, sometimes sat on his porch as winter returned. He watched the sky darken and the wind roll across the land. When snow began to fall, he made sure his fire was ready and his door was never blocked, just in case. He did not know if the woman ever thought of him. He did not need to know. What mattered was that she lived. That choice made during a storm stayed with him more than any other moment in his life. When the land grew quiet again under fresh snow, the ranch stood firm. Smoke rose from the chimney, steady and visible from far away. A small sign, perhaps, to anyone lost in the cold. The storm that brought them together became part of the past, but the lesson remained. In a world shaped by hardship, one act of shelter could echo for a lifetime.